I have been a fan of Gloria Steinem for many, many years. And she was one of the reasons why I went in marches and I burnt my bra a long time ago.
I admire her for her intelligence, and she was a journalist. And there's a sense of calmness about her as an activist that I think is an important quality that many people could learn from.
Just the conversation I had with her and the thoughts that she shared with me about what she saw that was going on, it just kind of opened my eyes up as to what could be and what wasn't.
I remember the Playboy story very well. That was a big moment.
I'm glad to see that there are other people who are still interested in these things and keeping these issues alive. Because we have to keep talking about them if anything's going to happen, if any change is going to happen.
I said, Helen, who is it that we should honor this year? And without even taking a breath, she said, Gloria Steinem. And that, of course, was no tall order. Gloria Steinem. I said, absolutely, let's do it. So I called her up and I said, Ms. Steinem, I would like to invite you to come to Tampa to receive the first Helen Gordon Davis Women's Leadership Award. And I said, pardon my persistence, but you know, well-behaved women never make anything exciting happen. And she said, call me Gloria. I knew we were in. There's one person who could not physically be here today. She is the reason we are all here, and that person is the incomparable Helen Gordon Davis. I am delighted that her family could join us today. Please help me welcome and thank her children, daughters Stephanie and Karen, please stand, and Gordon and Lorena.
Well, on behalf of my family, I would like to thank you all for this wonderful day that celebrates the lives of two remarkable women. We are so grateful that you, Gloria Steinem, have agreed to accept this award, the first, and we'll remember this forever, Helen Gordon Davis Leadership Award. Thank you very, very much for being here. While my mother cannot be here in person today, she is definitely cheering us on. As I look out across this room, I see so many of her wonderful friends, and you all know who you are, as well as the organizations that she has supported and have supported her, and the students who are here today who are probably learning about her for the very first time. During the second wave of feminism in the late 60s and early 70s, I think some of you were along for that ride, it was very cool to call your mother by her first name. It was an act of actually breaking down that power dynamic of mother-daughter, as if you could, right? So during that time, when I was faced with a moral dilemma or a situation that called for the high road, I would always think, WWHD, what would Helen do? And then it kind of morphed into WWGD, what would Gloria do? And actually the answer was always the same. It was to confront with a smile, don't back down, persist until you win, and speak for those who have been silenced. She has truly demonstrated that one woman can clearly make a difference for so many others. Thank you so much for being here today. Be a champion for women throughout your life. Thank you.
What I'd like to share to you today before I introduce her are some of the things I've learned about her on my 2-decade-long, I don't want to call it stalking, but my study of Gloria Steinem. She was born in 1934 on March the 25th, my sister's birthday, and the day of the third march in Selma. She's been called many things, but I've heard her identify herself as a journalist and a writer, first and foremost. She was born in Toledo, Ohio, and she was the youngest of two girls born to a homemaker and a father who struggled at times to make ends meet and who happened to be a Jew. Her parents divorced when she was about 11, and with her older sister away at college at Smith, she became the caregiver for her mother, who was mentally ill, and of course became more pronounced with time. In 1956, she graduated from Smith College, and that was followed by a 2-year postgraduate study in India, where she, did a lot of writing. She later moved to New York City, and she worked for Help magazine, later writing stories for Life, Esquire, Glamour, and many others you would recognize. She's been active in civil rights. She's worked on behalf of many causes, including the United Farm Workers, the Vietnam War, and feminist causes of all types, and also elections, including Adlai Stevenson, Robert Kennedy, and Shirley Chisholm. In 1964, she interviewed John Lennon for Cosmopolitan magazine. She became active in the women's movement around 1969, and in 1971, she founded Ms. Magazine. But what I've really learned as a reader and a student of Gloria Steinem is that she is very smart. She's insightful. She's a gifted communicator, and she has served as a leader in an uncommon time. Her life has been one of self-inspection, and without a doubt, she is one of our greatest sociological thinkers and writers on the topic of modern feminism. I can't tell you how my 10-year-old self is exploding to introduce to you Ms. Gloria Steinem.
It's because of you. I never considered myself a feminist. I considered myself an equal. I worry more about my 13-year-old son's future than my 9-year-old daughter's. She has all the confidence in the world, and I feel like when you have positive role models heading you in the right direction, you're going to do well. And I'm wondering how you react to that, what I just said, that I worry less about my daughter's future and more about my son's.
Well, the first thing I thought of was she's 9. Because what happens is, we're these independent tree-climbing creatures saying, I know what I want, I know what I think. And then the feminine role comes down upon us about 11 or 12 or 13. And suddenly we're saying, how clever of you to know what time it is and things like that, So the role hasn't happened to her yet. I mean, Carol Gilligan has written pioneering works and studies on this in a different voice, which I'm sure some of you know. So, but having said that, because the hard time is coming,
I've heard that.
Having said that, I too want your 13-year-old son to have whole people as a model who are male human beings. And that is difficult. Not because men get, through no fault of theirs, born into this system in which there is an idea of masculine and feminine, which incidentally doesn't exist. I mean, for 95% of human history, the languages didn't even have he and she. A human being was a human being. What a concept, So the whole idea of just came along with patriarchal, or whatever you want to call them, androcentric systems in which men started to control reproduction, which they hadn't, say in Native American cultures here or in ancient cultures. So the idea of masculinity is all about control in order to control reproduction. So let's just say, forget about it. Progress lies in the direction we haven't been, and let's think of whole people who are men for your son. I totally agree that he needs that kind of model, and there are amazing. With all the scandal about football, and
Domestic
violence and everything else, and head injury and everything else that's bad about football. There are a group of male football players who talk about domestic violence because their mothers experienced it. And I have seen them get up with tears streaming down their face because they remember what they watched their mother endure. So, it's all about empathy.
What's it like to be Gloria Steinem? Really?
I don't know the alternative, so how do I know?
I mean, you walked in the room and people were like, there she is. There she is.
But you know, obviously I don't really know. I don't have a comparative. But I do see other people who are well known, say, for being actors. And I understand how lucky I am because they are recognized for something that isn't them. And it drives them crazy. And in my case, I'm recognized for something I care about deeply. You know, it is, you know, so in my case, it's kind of great because it's like being able to skip the first 6 weeks of lunches. You know what you care about. It's like instant friendship. I just got off a plane. The flight attendants are like my flying girlfriends, you know. So because it has substance, it's good.
Where do you think we stand in terms of equal rights today? What needs to be done? Who's dropped the ball? Who
wait,
isn't?
wait. This is like describe the universe and give 2 examples. She's asking.
And be quick about it. I know. Reader's Digest version, please.
First of all, it's where each of you are. You know, I mean, the movement is where it is when you look in the mirror. In a big general way, we have only the comparison of the suffragist and abolitionist movements in this country. And that took 100 years to gain a legal identity as human beings instead of chattel. Everybody was chattel up to then. So by that measure, 40 years, you know, we're not quite halfway into it. We've kind of gone through the consciousness raising stage where you realize it's possible, you know, although that happens with every new issue too. And we're well into the legislative stage, striving, and we're nowhere near, you know, we're way down. We're like the 80th in the world. I mean, we're really not good in the world comparatively. And we have a backlash. So the question is, we don't know, you know, what will happen because the backlash could win. And I must say that part of the reason I so admire Helen, can we say a few words about? First of all, Helen to me is much more remarkable and even miraculous than anything I've done because I always have had a group of women and men who were supportive. Helen was in the middle of a very hostile atmosphere and under scrutiny absolutely all the time. That is incredible courage. Secondly, she was in a state legislature. And she didn't lose any of her humanity. You know, she kept her humor and her joy and her kind of great shit-free attitude. She has never imitated.
Say shit-free?
No, I said, well, I say things like that, so watch out. But also, she is a prophet in a real serious way because, talking about where the movement is, we have to pay more attention to state legislatures. We have fallen for the idea that change comes from the top. And of course, you know, that's crucial. But the catch-22 of democracy are state legislatures, which are mostly controlled by the businesses they regulate, which are the reason that there may be people in this room graduating from college in debt because state legislatures have cut the money for universities and used it to build prisons we don't need. Right. They redistrict themselves into perpetuity. You know, if it weren't for this one, Al Gore would have been president, and we wouldn't have had 2 wars in Iraq. And you know what? I don't have to go on about that. I happen to have been speaking at Dade County Community College the morning after the 2000 election.
The hanging Chad.
Yes, and in that room there were about 700 people, and about 100 of them had been either unable to vote for reasons not their, you know, or had voted for the wrong, you know, I mean, in that single room. And as you know, there was, I think, a dozen newspapers surveyed all the votes afterwards, and Gore did win by any measure. By any measure. I mean, the court said there was no measure, but by any measure, he won. Anyway, state legislatures are so crucial, and they are the reason we lose the House of Representatives because they redistrict. The Senate is usually not more like the majority opinion because you can't redistrict a state. now many legislatures, I don't know about Florida, are trying to to distribute electoral votes by congressional district, which will then take away the one democratic vote by vote plebiscite kind of vote we have, which is for the president. So, you know, Helen was in the most important place, not just then, but in the future. And she truly is a prophet. And we need to pay attention. She needs to be the model for us.
Since you brought up the presidential race in 2000, could you give us an overview of your thoughts of the presidential race in 2016?
Look, I don't know anything that everybody in this room doesn't know, you know, and obviously we hope and believe that this time, I mean, let me just, perhaps the only thing I would say that might be a little thoughtful about this is I always knew the last time Hillary Clinton, or I felt deeply that she could not win because it was just too soon for any woman except somebody like Margaret Thatcher, who was, you know, another problem. But I mean, but somebody who really represented women. It was too soon for a woman to win. But now I think it's not. I think in large part because of her and others, people are now more accustomed to seeing a female human being in authority in that way. And up until recently, I thought it would take longer because we're mostly raised by women. Most women and men are mostly raised by women, so we associate female authority with childhood. And especially, I think it's hard for men, as you can see by what some of the guys say on television, because when they see a female in authority, the last time they saw one, they were 8. You know, so they feel regressed to childhood in some sense. But I think even though child rearing has not changed enough, and men are still not raising children as much as women, though much more than they used to, I do think that Hillary, it's possible now because people are more accustomed to seeing women in authority.
Do you think it will happen?
I have no idea. You know, I mean, you know, we all know how complicated it is from now to then.
First of all, I'd like to say I'm dazzled to be in your presence. You are a rock star in my world, and I fully appreciate that you are one of the people that has made it possible for me to have the liberty to do what I do every day.
And what do you do every day?
I run a company. I employ 60 people, and I work in politics on the Hill.
Great. That's great.
I'd like to ask what you think about the current administration's foreign policy in terms of women, because I'm constantly struck by the difference between all of the administration's approach to countries where women have no rights, are oppressed, are killed, are sold, are brutalized, compared to South Africa, where when we had half of the population oppressed, brutalized, sold because they were different, we boycotted. And we never do seem to do that for women. And given that I am hearing a lot of loyalty to the Democratic side of the aisle, I'm curious about what you think about this administration's approach to that.
Well, I think that because of Hillary as Secretary of State, it's the first time that the status of women has entered into foreign policy decisions at all. Right. And I just want to say, to echo, thank you for that question, because there is a very important book called Sex and World Peace by Valerie Hudson and other scholars, but it's readable. And they have taken 100, all the major countries in the world and demonstrated that the single greatest determinant of whether a country will be violent within itself or will be willing to use military violence against another country is actually not poverty, not access to natural resources, not religion or even degree of democracy. It's violence against females. because that is what normalizes everything else. It's the most widespread. We experience it in our homes. It's what causes us to believe that it's normal, to have a subject and an object, or for one person to dominate another, because that's what we see when we're growing up. So thank you for what you said, because obviously you're right. It should be as crucial to our foreign policy as our attitude toward apartheid in South Africa, which incidentally took a really long time to change, because for a long time we were supporting apartheid in South Africa. And we have to take that into consideration. I would say that this administration has been probably the best so far, but I would say that's like 20 out of a possible 100. We have a long way to go.
Hi, Gloria. To preface my question, I'm Stacy Dolan. I'm with the University of South Florida Special Collections, and I'm actually working on a research project funded by the Honorable Betty Castor on women in leadership. So my question actually pertains to that contemporary time between you, Betty, and Helen working on the Equal Rights Amendment in Florida from the 70s to the early 80s. And as most of us know, the Equal Rights Amendment critically failed in Florida. Between Illinois, North Carolina, and Florida, it was one of the most crucial states to have it passed. And I was wondering if in the years following the Equal Rights Amendment campaign, if there were any of the greatest challenges in Florida that you could elaborate on, and the biggest takeaways you have as a political activist from that movement.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing this study, because it's absolutely crucial. As you know, the Equal Rights Amendment may come back. I mean, it will eventually come back, but I mean, it's very much more active now. And, I think that that was my first awakening. I had no idea how undemocratic state legislatures were until the Equal Rights Amendment. I mean, for instance, in Nevada, I remember we elected 7 state legislatures tours on the grounds of their support for the ERA, and everyone voted against it when they got in office. Because the leadership said, if you ever want to be a committee chair, if you want your ethics rap dropped, I mean, they had some very big arguments. And I think that's what happened here, too, because there was no point at which the majority of people living in Florida did not support the Equal Rights Amendment by about 60%. But the state legislature didn't recognize it, didn't follow the majority public opinion. And here what stands out in my memory is that the media, so much of the media was on the other side, was against the Equal Rights Amendment. Because I remember, raising money for an ad that actually had the words of the 26 words of the Equal Rights Amendment in it, most of which rarely were even reported. And we raised money with great difficulty, and a station, a Florida television station, gave the antis free an anti-ad in which the Equal Rights Amendment was represented by photographs of the gay parade in San Francisco, and the antis were represented by the Dolphins and the football, right. I mean, so it was actually my big lesson in how important state legislatures are, and I just hope there are more candidates in this room who are going to follow Helen's example, and more of us in this room are going to pay attention to this state legislature.
When you look to a younger generation, who inspires you today? Do you have one person that really inspires you?
Oh, there's so many. Gosh, I don't know. I mean, there's Ai-jen Poo. Do you know who that is? She's a great activist organizer of household workers. And she has, there's a whole uprising, as you may have noticed, in what's called the pink collar ghetto. That is the jobs that are mostly female, poorly paid jobs of food service, the household workers, home care, all of those areas. And I think it's very exciting, because it's like like the original labor union movement, bread and roses of the past, is happening over again. And our labor movement, I think, in the interim, they knew about the bread, but they forgot the roses. You know, so people like iGen are organizing in an empathetic outreach way, not a hostile way, and organizing the employers as well as the workers and so on. And that's, I mean, there are many, many others, but she comes to mind. And you know, look at her book; it's great.
Well, I'd just like to say I'm a huge fan. I'm pretty excited to see you. I wrote a bunch of papers about you in college, and I'm just really excited. My question is, from my perspective, the third waivers are seeing a huge onslaught of things being undone that was done by the second wave. Particularly concerning to me is the attacks on our access to, you know, contraception and safe abortion. And I wanted to know what your thoughts were for the third waivers as to what we do to stop this.
Well, no, you're right, because the second wave came along in the time of the backlash. You know, the backlash really began in the late 80s, something like that. And again, it is state legislatures that are overturning past rulings about the accessibility of abortion, what you need to have a clinic. You know, they're just making the requirements to have a clinic completely impossible. So once again, it's one of the major reasons I think we should focus on the state legislatures much more. And I hope and believe that the fourth waivers will do that. And it's not hard to do. I mean, so every 10 people in this room could take one state legislator and just monitor that person, communicate with that person, you know. So I mean, stalk them, and run for office and expose what's going on. And so I mean, it's doable. And I do think that the younger women are beginning to understand that our focus has been perhaps too much on Washington.
It's wonderful to be here. It's Denise Vasquez Troutman with the Troutman Group, where health equity and social justice should be a movement. This is more on a personal note. I also stalked you, and today was the first time that I heard you spent some time in India. I spent some time in India myself, and it was an awakening and a becoming for me, and wanted to know what your experience was like there.
Yes, it made a huge difference to me. It took me a long time to discover it, because I was there so long ago, right after college. I lived there for 2 years. And when I came back, there was absolutely zero awareness of it. I mean, even the Beatles hadn't been to India yet, you know. No, but I would try to talk about India, and people would just nod off, you know. But in retrospect, what I learned there really is how to organize, because Gandhian organizing is bottom up. The means are the ends. The ends don't justify the means. The means, the way you do it dictates what you get. And they taught me the rules of organizing. You know, if you want people to listen to you, you have to listen to them. If you want to know how they live or change how they live, you have to go where they live. If just the sort of basic rules of organizing. And I've been grateful to them ever since. And then I went back to India 20 years later, and with a friend there, we were going to do a collection of Gandhi's letters for women's movements around the world, because we thought nonviolent methods are, obviously very appropriate to women's movements, and consumer boycotts, everything that he did. So we were going around collecting information, and we talked to a woman named Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay. I don't know if there's some more books coming out about her now. Wonderful, amazing woman. And she was sitting there on her veranda sipping tea and rocking, and she listened to us. And she said, "Well, of course, my dear, we taught him everything he knew." And it turned out that those methods, what we think of as Gandhian methods, were pioneered and used by the massive women's movement during the British era in India, when they were trying to stop sati and child marriage and so on. So sometimes what we're drawn to, it turns out, was invented in the past mainly by women.
I met you in 1984, actually the person that accosted you in the restroom earlier this morning. And the reason it was so important, for a couple reasons. One, you've been a voice in my head ever since, and I really have to agree with Lisa on what would Gloria do, and I appreciate that leadership from you. But what I remember most about that was you were presenting to a large group, and a young man stood up, and he talked about some atrocities that were happening in the fraternity system. And I remember you stopped, and you thanked him for coming forward and being brave. And then you looked at the administration and you said, you know what you need to do. And they did it. Here we are in 2015, and the language isn't changing and the behavior's not changing. And there's a lot of writings, right? There's a lot of published work now about the crisis of men, and I think we're seeing some of that play out in our fraternity environment and some different environments in our country. And I want to have your input on where do you think we go with this, and how can we be from 1984 to 2015 and having the same dialogue?
Look, this is deep we're talking about. You know, it's we've had something between 500 years on this continent and 5,000 years in other parts of the world of patriarchy. But the good news is that that's 1 to 5% of human history. All right, but it's still big and deep. We're trying to change something, but so it's going to take time. It takes time. But two things have happened since the date you discuss, which is, one is that there are a lot more men who are caring for their kids and who are raised to be whole people. Women become whole people usually by being active outside the home. Men become whole people by being active inside the home. We're all trying to develop all of our full human qualities. And it's great for men too. Men live longer, they, they get to know their own kids. I mean, it's... But the other thing that happens is that there is a backlash of people who are obsessed with the cult of masculinity. That's what terrorism is, in fact. So that's the way it goes. You go forward, you have a backlash. You go forward, you have a backlash. But every male human being who's brave enough to be a whole person is somebody for whom I have terminal gratitude. It's absolutely crucial, and we need to make sure, to your point, that our sons and the young men we know have people in their lives, and we need to make sure that we don't desert them. The child-rearing theories of the past were all about reproducing patriarchy. So women, mothers, were supposed to let go of their sons. Heaven forfend you might make him, a sissy, which is like code for homophobia, right? And the bravest thing a mother can do is to stay attached to her son and to make sure, that he... Because when a mother deserts a son in the name of making him a man, that son may never trust another woman again, because the person he was most closest to and dependent on often has just deserted him. So, it's deep. It's deep. And in answer to what we should do, I think we think too much about what we should do, because that's like a top-down thing. I think the answer is do whatever we can, every day. I just wanted to say something about the Women's Center, because, sometimes people, they ask you big questions, like you ask me big questions, so you have to develop an answer, And so people will say, well, what one thing would you want for the women's movement worldwide? Okay. So I've developed an answer. Good. Okay.
I can't wait.
A kind of worldwide feminist AA. Because women's groups, like your Women's Center, and groups of supportive men, are the single most important thing. We are communal creatures. We cannot do it alone. If we are by ourselves, we feel it's our fault. We feel crazy. We can't do it alone. I would so love to see around the world the groups, AA groups are great. They're free, they're leaderless, so you could find a feminist group by the banks of the, Quasi River in Africa. You could find one in the basement of the YWCA. You could, wherever you were moving or wherever in the same way, you could find a group. And I say that because I think what the Women's Center is doing is the single most important thing we can possibly do, which is to come together, tell the truth, discover it's not just happening to us, it's happening to other people too, therefore it's not our fault. It's political if it's happening to all these different people, and if we get together, we can change it. There is nothing on earth more important than that. So I thank you.
Gloria, on behalf of the Center for Women, the Board of Directors, and the staff, just congratulations and thank you for everything you have done for women. We are very grateful.
Do you all know each other? You know, I think this is such an opportunity to have a room full of good hearts and great minds and shared purpose. And I always worry about whether or what's going to happen tomorrow. So before you leave, if you see 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people you don't know, please introduce yourselves, say what you care about, what you're doing. If we're here, we probably, you know, have deeply shared purposes, and you know, you have no idea what could happen. You know, you'll find a new job, a new friend, a new love affair, a new, you know, who knows? And I just hope that you will carry the spirit of this room with you. It is true that we get isolated from each other, and that's what makes us feel that it's not possible. It is absolutely 100% possible. You know, I used to quote sometimes the physicist who said that the flap of a butterfly's wing changes the weather hundreds of miles away. And therefore, you know, it's a great image of how much power we have even though we don't know it. And then I thought, well, that's a little, even for me, the hopeaholic, that's maybe a little saccharine. So I went to read about butterflies, and I discovered that what happens is that there is a little cell in the body of the caterpillar that knows how to become a butterfly. And that cell activates and uses the body of the caterpillar as food and gradually becomes a butterfly. And that cell is actually called an imaginal cell biologically. It's such a lovely term, isn't it? So that to me was a more realistic description of how change happens. There is resistance, but the resistance creates energy and creates what you need, you know, to test your strength and go further. So if every one of us in this room is an imaginal cell, I would say we can make one hell of a butterfly.
It was awesome. It was so interesting to hear about like her thoughts on the government and just like everything. Everything came like so naturally with her, and it was so interesting. Like I've never heard of her until now, and I'm a college student, so I'm going home and looking up every article possible about her because it's so interesting to hear about what she has to say about everything.
Today was a really special day. I mean, I'm a young woman and just learning about what came before me and where we can go and just what the previous generations have thought about today's issues. I think it's been a really great event for everyone of every generation to be here today.
I think this is important for everyone to be a part of. I think this is an incredible event. This shows the world that women do rule, that we rock, that young women who are growing up now can be whatever it is they want to be. They can accomplish anything that they set out to accomplish, and that we have people who pave the way for us to do the things that we're doing and doing the things that we want to do.
I got so many things out of the day. More than anything, I took away the message that what we need to do is everything we can do every day, that we make big difference through small changes every day.